These days, when Annie and Trey Gillespie entertain, the front yard is one of their favorite spots. But until Annie wrangled the harsh terrain, the only safe foot traffic was for deer. She learned construction and drainage techniques as a kid when she joined her dad on his projects as a civil engineer. But her career as a garden designer started at home while she raised their family and worked in her garden. It was there that she discovered how her various paths converged.
I enjoy building. That's what I love. I love designing it on paper, and then taking that paper and putting it on the ground. I just really love that process. It's very creative for me. I'm a botanist by degree. When I first moved to Austin in 1981, I eventually got a job back in 1983 at the, which was what called National Wildflower Research Center, Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And I worked there about 8 years. And that's sort of how I got a little more involved in using native plants and plant landscapes, and launched my business after that.
Recreating her own front yard was one of her challenges.
This was a steep slope that dropped all the way down, and it was just St. Augustine with a few oak trees popped in.
In 2006, she leveled a space to build a patio near the house where prevailing southeast winds in the trees make it pleasant even in summer.
I couldn't level the entire yard because that would have been probably a 25-foot retaining wall, but that now it's about a 6-foot wall at its peak. What we brought in primarily to fill that up is road base, and we tamped it down. We wetted it and tamped it down, so structurally it's not going anywhere. It's really tamped down. But the edge between the pea gravel and the wall, I knew I wanted to have a little plant bed there, so I allowed enough room to put about 12 inches of good soil in.
Plants soften the stone and the reflective pea gravel. She added a disappearing fountain to complete the restful mood. Even though Annie has dramatic terrain, gardeners in the flatlands can add levels of interest.
This was definitely a slope, so that's really what drove the different levels in this particular garden. But sometimes if you think in terms of different levels, perhaps even in soil, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll berm, take a flat piece of property, and somebody wants to create a plant bed on the corner, say. It's much more interesting to bring in a bunch of soil and berm it, and perhaps pepper in some boulders and create some outcropping, because you give the land a little topography, and then you're also creating some pockets to plant things. So that's sort of fun to do with. You don't have to do that, but sometimes that's kind of fun, to just change up the topography of the land a little bit.
Another issue was drainage, since rain is often brief but intense. Annie solved flood events on her slope with a dry creek bed.
The most important thing when you're dealing with water is slowing it down. If you don't slow it down, then it becomes very erosive, and that's where you get a lot of problems. So using large river rocks or boulders to slow the water down goes a long way to preventing washouts.
Like many gardeners, Annie has both sun and shade in her front yard. In the shady spots, she includes variegated texture.
And I think variegation pops a little more in shade. In shade, you don't necessarily have as many things that will flower, but you can do a lot of fun things with texture and contrast.
She added a deer fence to enclose her new garden. Plus, it keeps their latest rescues in. Outside the fence, she planted the front yard and driveway with deer in mind. In back, the terrain once again prompted her design.
That was just a raw stone cliff and then a flat St. Augustine yard. It was the only flat area we had, to play and to go out and enjoy being outside with the children. Over time, I decided to go ahead and build that stone planter, but the water feature evolved because that little section of the stone is where water sheets over. There's naturally a waterfall that occurs when we have flood events, and it sheets over that cliff, drops and hits the lawn. The lawn is graded so the water flows down and around to the side of the house and flows down the hill. So I knew I couldn't put a planter right there. So that's sort of where the idea of the waterfall came from, that I'll just play off of what actually naturally occurs.
From her experience, Annie has advice for other gardeners.
I think sometimes people, when they lay out beds, they're too busy. There's too many curves, there's too many shapes, and so I would suggest thinking in terms of long sweeping curves, lazy S's, and not busy it up. Just make it really lazy. And the other thing I am a big proponent of, is thinking in terms of maturity and not overplanting. I like to let plants grow up and have room to grow so that 5 or 6 years later, after they've fully matured, you can really sit back and appreciate the plant. This is when you should be really enjoying a plant, opposed to thinking, oh my God, it's overtaking this section of my yard, I need to prune this back. And I think that's something in landscaping that's done over and over and over, planting too close to the house, too close together, so they don't let the garden breathe and mature. And I like having space and being able to sit back and appreciate a particular habit of a plant.